Today I will be discussing libertarianism in the United States. You'll notice that there's a big contrast between libertarianism in the United States and the presentation we saw the other day about libertarianism in the Netherlands. You're also going to hear me struggle over the word libertarianism about 1,000 times because it is a mouthful and I have to say it a lot. In the presentation about liberalism in the Netherlands, we heard about how the libertarians want equal access to housing, equal pay, and other things that are commonly considered components of socialism. In the United States, libertarianism is basically the exact opposite of this. The reason for the discrepancy is because around the time of Roosevelt and the New Deal, the use of the word liberal became synonymous with leftism, and those who identified as liberals took exception to this. I found a quote from writer Dean Russell that explains how they felt a lot better than I ever could. Here it is. Many of us call ourselves liberals, and it is true that the word liberal once described persons who respected the individual and feared the use of mass compulsions. But the leftists have now corrupted that once proud term to identify themselves and their program of more government ownership of property and more controls over persons. As a result, those of us who believe in freedom must explain that when we call ourselves liberals, we mean liberals in the uncorrupted, classical sense. At best, this is awkward and subject to misunderstanding. Here is a suggestion. Let those of us who love liberty trademark and reserve for our own use the good and honorable word, libertarian. The philosophy of the people running countries instead of governments has existed throughout history, even BC. Libertarianism historically goes hand in hand with anarchism because its proponents often urge the masses to overthrow the government. Today's libertarians in the United States downplay this aspect of the philosophy and actually require a pledge of nonviolence when you join the party. In the United States, libertarianism gained footing in the 1960s in response to the Vietnam War, the draft, and the Black Power movement, and they became an official party in the 70s. Over the past 50 years or so, corporations have actually been paralleled with government as needing to be overthrown and taken back by the people. However, this kind of contradicts one of their basic philosophies of maintaining a free market. The slogan for the party is the Party of Principle, because as they state, they stand firmly on their principles of strongly opposing any government interference into their personal, family, and business decisions, and the belief that essentially all Americans should be free to live their lives and pursue their interests as they see fit as long as they do no harm to another. The basics of libertarianism are pretty straightforward. They want a free market economy and the abundance and prosperity that it can bring. They want a dedication to civil liberties and personal freedom. And they want a foreign policy of non-intervention, peace, and free trade as described by America's founders. The only thing they want government to do basically is have a military to protect us from others and have EMS systems like fire and health. What they don't want is what they call a nanny state or a welfare state. They don't want Social Security, they don't want welfare, they don't want any governing body such as the FDA, Health and Human Services, Fisheries and Wildlife, etc. They also don't want the government to be involved in any way in business or the economy. Because one of the basic philosophies of libertarianism is you leave me alone and I'll leave you alone, we don't hear a lot about specific or famous libertarians. But a few you may have heard of are Clint Eastwood, Henry David Thoreau, and the most popularly quoted guy ever, Ralph Waldo Emerson. As with most parties, within the party, there are both left and right-wing libertarians who do not agree on the basic principles of the ideology. The left wing strives to move libertarianism back toward the original idea of people taking back the government and has a more socialist agenda, similar to libertarianism in the rest of the world, as we saw in the presentation about the Netherlands. Whereas right-wing libertarianism is more mainstream libertarianism, what we think about when we hear the term. They want government to have a role in protection and safety only. I actually found it interesting that in a Pew poll done in 2014, 23% of self-identified libertarians had little understanding of what it actually meant to be a libertarian. So just some little fun facts about libertarianism in the United States and then in Maine. It's the third largest party with around 500,000 people registered as libertarians. That number is a little off because in some states, libertarianism isn't a party because they haven't had enough votes in past elections. So all of those people don't count. The chairperson in the United States has been chairperson since 2014. He is Nicholas Sarwark. And right now, the two top presidential candidates for the Libertarian Party are Jacob Hornberger and Vermin Supreme, which, were I a libertarian, I'd be a little disappointed in because Vermin Supreme is not a person who's ever going to be taken seriously or accepted as a mainstream candidate, and I certainly wouldn't want that person to be the face of my party. The Maine Libertarian Party was established in 1975, but they have come in and out of hiatus as there have been several years where they didn't meet the minimum 10,000 vote to maintain their status as a party. Right now, 659 people follow the Maine Libertarianism Facebook page versus 2,300 who follow the Green Party's page. So that leads me to think that in Maine, Libertarianism is not the third most popular party as it is countrywide. There are only two current identified candidates, Cody Blackburn and Bonnie Young. Looks like Cody is running for Maine House, as is Bonnie Young. I decided to add in a slide about the party's response to COVID-19 because I noticed that somebody else did, and I thought that was pretty interesting. And I also think that responses to specific issues say a lot about the way a party is run. While reviewing the response of the Libertarian Party to COVID-19, I did notice a lot of written material and discussion by libertarians about the possible political ramifications of this disaster, causing the government to gain even more power. Oddly enough, on the same day, we all learned that President Trump relieved of duty the person responsible for his impeachment. So that kind of goes along with the way they feel about things that may be happening politically in the background as we're all out here worrying about our lives and livelihoods. I found researching libertarianism quite interesting because a lot like the Green Party, both seem like, sure, it would be a great way for the country to run itself. However, they both seem a little too simplistic and a little too utopian to actually ever become an actuality. This is illustrated by the fact that no country has ever successfully become a libertarianism country, and further by the fact that libertarianism hasn't even been able to gain a strong enough foothold to even have a legitimate presidential candidate. While I was working on this presentation, my 17-year-old son walked in, because he's here now, all the time, 24/7, but I digress. Anyway, he asked me what I was doing, so I explained libertarianism in a nutshell to him, and he just started laughing and rolled his eyes and said, "Oh, yeah, sure, Mom, great idea." Because lately Americans have shown that they have so much common sense to be able to govern themselves, or not. I think I'll just leave it at that.